Subsidize. I'm the chairman of the Leamington Society. Can I welcome you all very, very much to this meeting, which is to talk about the future of transport in Royal Leamington Spa. And we're joined by Gary Palmer and Margaret Smith from the County Council, who are very kindly going to take us through it. Welcome, thank you very much indeed for coming. Over to you, transport in Leamington Spa.
Thank you. Right, so hopefully I'm sharing my screen with you now.
Yes.
Can you see the local transport plan refresh?
Yes.
Excellent, that's a good start then. So we're going to talk to you today about the local transport plan in Warwickshire. It's very timely because we are currently quite near the beginning of the process of looking to renew the local transport plan in Warwickshire and replace it with a new, more up-to-date version. So the first thing that I thought I would talk to you about is what a local transport plan is. So you can see there our current local transport plan in Warwickshire. And what a transport plan is, formerly it was a statutory document, so it was required by the DFT that all highway authorities produce a local transport plan. That's no longer the case, but it is still a Warwickshire County Council core strategy. So it's one of the main things that shapes the actions of Warwickshire County Council, and obviously has a particular focus on transport and highways. It does a few things. It establishes a baseline of transport sort of capability in the county, accessibility and levels of pollution, very pertinent at the moment. It sets goals for the authority as a transport authority, including an action plan to achieve those goals. So we're talking really about delivery of infrastructure works related to transport in Warwickshire. It's also used to attract funding for those schemes. So obviously Warwickshire County Council has resources of its own, but not infinite resources by any means. So where those resources are directed towards transport schemes, then the contents of the local transport plan is used to prioritise the use of those resources. But there are also external sources of funding for highway infrastructure works from such places as the Department for Transport, the Local Enterprise Partnership, and also developers who are carrying out construction in the county, whether that be for dwellings or for business purposes or any other purpose that somebody might choose to carry out some construction in the county. They can be asked to provide contributions to requisite improvements of the transport infrastructure network. It also contains several strategies for any sort of type of transport that you could think of, really. So any type of road user, rail users as well, people who engage in cycling and other forms of active travel, such as walking, public transport, not just buses, but any type of public transport that you could think of, and then also sort of our developing and future modes of transport. So e-scooters, you can see in the picture there, hopefully as they perhaps become more common, they'll be stored slightly more neatly than that. But also things like ultra low emission vehicles as they become more common, be they battery powered, and the requirements that we will need to provide charging points for those sorts of vehicles in the future, but other types of ultra low emission vehicles such as hydrogen powered vehicles as they also become more common, and other things like very light rail, anything that's sort of on the horizon, I suppose, from a transport planning perspective. And it does all those things, but it does more as well. So it sets out policies for all sorts of areas where the county council interacts with the highway and other transport links, such as road safety, maintenance, asset management. It sets standards for Warwickshire County Council's highways in terms of how they're constructed and how they are kept in the state that they should be. And it is the basis under which the county council, as the highway authority, interacts with the planning process that I've alluded to previously. So where a planning application is submitted through the planning authority, Warwickshire County Council is a key consultee through its role as the highway authority, and this document or documents sets the basis through which the county council can respond to those applications. So you can see there that we have an LTP. It came into effect in 2011, and it was due to run until 2026. 15 years is a fairly typical time span for an LTP, as they have existed since sort of the early 90s until today. We've decided to bring that end date forward and renew the local transport plan in Warwickshire prior to that sort of time scale. This is because changes over the last 10 years mean that some parts of the existing local transport plan are starting to become outdated, and the pace of change over that period means that some things have become considerations on a transportation front that were not necessarily considerations at the point where we were drafting local transport plan 3 in sort of 2009, 2010. So therefore, in 2019, we started our project to create a new local transport plan in Warwickshire. One of the first things that we did was start to consider the principles and themes under which we would seek to guide transport in Warwickshire over the duration of our next local transport plan. And so we have developed some principles and some themes that you can see on the slide in front of you now, under which we propose to sort of set out the next local transport plan. So the principles are what you can see on the left-hand side of your screen at the moment, and the circles with the names next to them. So firstly, this is going to be a people-focused document. It's about the people that live in, travel in, to and through Warwickshire, and is going to serve the needs of those people. The second principle is activity. So this is the notion that, with some exceptions for active methods of travel, such as walking and cycling, travel is not a means in and of itself, but it's a means to an end. So we travel for a specific purpose, and at the end of our journey, we will be doing something, such as, for example, traveling to work. And at the end of our daily commute, we'll stay somewhere and do our job. But there are other things that we, of course, travel for. So there are daily requirements such as shopping, medical appointments, anything that you can think of really that you need to carry out as part of your day-to-day existence, and it's not on your doorstep going on a holiday. We all need transport links to enable us to take part in those activities that we wish to take part in, whether they be work, play, or some other form of core need to our lives. And then lastly, it's obviously a transport plan. So in terms of the interventions and targets that come out of it, they're going to be transport related targets. So those are the overarching principles under which we are looking to develop the next local transport plan in Warwickshire. On the right-hand side, you can see some dashboards of themes that we've developed. Now, the purpose of the themes is twofold, really. It's to engender conversation about transport in Warwickshire. So there's some key points that we can sort of talk to people about transport. They're also, as I say, the basis under which we are proposing to create the next local transport plan. So starting at the back, we have place. So this is particularly key in Warwickshire compared to some other areas of the country. And this is the notion that transport links have to serve particular places and their requirements, and not all places are the same. And in Warwickshire in particular, we have some quite urban places, Leamington being a prime example of one of the urban areas in Warwickshire, and we have very rural locations as well. So there's quite a distinct split. If you were talking to a metropolitan borough council, then it would perhaps be a more urban focus. But in Warwickshire, we have to pay attention to the needs of people who are travelling between more rural and more urban locations, and there is no one-size-fits-all approach to transport that can serve all of those locations. If it's a densely populated area, a more sparsely populated area, somewhere that's being given over to business or retail or shopping or leisure, then all of those places have different needs in terms of the transport links that will serve them. So place, we think, is one of the key themes under which you can consider transport in Warwickshire. In front of that is well-being. I've already mentioned that we want this to be a people-focused document or set of documents, and key to that is the well-being of the people who use transport links in Warwickshire, live near to transport links in Warwickshire, and this can be in terms of ensuring your safety while you're using these transport links, making sure that they're as easy and stress-free to use as is possible, something that's perhaps not always the case, particularly when you're thinking about commuting to work, but also making sure that you have access to those things such as medical appointments, be that attending doctors' surgeries or hospitals, or the many social care appointments where we as the county council, for example, have to go out and meet people in their homes for medical or well-being purposes. So that's sort of our second key theme, ensuring that transport links serve the people of Warwickshire and keep them as healthy and happy as they can possibly be. Then in front of that, the next key theme is that of environment, which almost speaks for itself these days, I think. But we have declared a climate emergency in Warwickshire. We, of course, have national targets to become carbon neutral by 2050. Transport is a key part of that picture if carbon neutrality by 2050 is to be achieved. Transport is now the single biggest contributor to carbon emissions in this country, having relatively recently overtaken industry. And whereas industry has seen big gains in terms of reducing carbon emissions, the transport sector is more problematic. It's more of a plateau, and less obvious progress has been made. So there are key and obvious reasons why environment in the transport sector is a key area where Warwickshire can contribute towards that effort to improve the environment and achieve those aims of carbon reduction. And it also applies to things like air quality as well, which is an issue in various places in the county. And then lastly, but certainly not least, there is economy, which is probably the traditional driver of local transport plans up to this point, and will certainly still be a key part of the local transport plan in Warwickshire going forward. I think at the point where we began this project, which was prior to COVID-19 becoming a thing, we envisaged that this would be with a view to facilitating economic growth in Warwickshire, as has been the case through LTPs previously. We perhaps now will, over the short term and the medium term, shift to focus towards recovery from the impacts that COVID-19 has had on the economy. But hopefully in the longer term, we can return to that desire to facilitate economic growth in Warwickshire and attract investment into the county. So those are the themes that we've developed. And as I say, they are to facilitate conversation around transport, but they are also the basis under which we propose to proceed with developing the various documents that will form part of the local transport plan, which brings us to the consultation that we are in the midst of at the moment. So we began a consultation on the key themes around local transport plan in January this year. That consultation runs until midnight on the 18th of March. That's the point at which the County Council goes into its pre-election period for the elections in May. And we are really seeking feedback from any interested stakeholders as to whether those four key themes do form the basis under which we can proceed to start to draft the next LTP in more detail. And also within that, in the questionnaire, we asked some more detailed questions about where relative priorities could lie in terms of what's going to be developed over the life of the next local transport plan in Warwickshire. So I would encourage anybody with an interest to go and fill in that survey and give us your feedback. It's due to run until the 18th of March, as I say. And then at the same time, as we're considering that, we're also thinking about how the local transport plan can be presented in its new format. So I'm sure all of you are regular users of the existing LTP, and will know therefore that it's quite a weighty tome. It's 430 something pages of text about all of the things that I've mentioned previously. It's quite difficult to have a specific question that you want to ask that's transport related and navigate that document to the place where you want to be. So one of the things that we're also considering is how we can make that more accessible to people who have an interest in the document, or more likely series of documents that we'll publish in the next iteration. This is still very much an open conversation, but it's likely to be something along the lines of tiered documents that sort of nest together and form the local transport plan as a whole, with a core strategy, quite a high level document sitting at the top that sets the overall direction for transport in Warwickshire, and then underneath that a series of more specific strategies and action plans that set out how we're going to deal with certain transport related issues over the life of the plan. So this could be local area plans that address perhaps the districts and the boroughs of the county in particular. It could also be modal strategies about particular types of transport, like cycling, rail, anything that you could think of really that set out that what we want to the sort of the current situation, what we want to achieve over the life of the plan, and then an action plan that we can monitor to check that we're on course with delivering those aims. And then probably sitting underneath that, or perhaps slightly separately, would be perhaps a policy framework that sets out sort of how we operate on a very granular basis in terms of the different things that we do in terms of highways. So relating to our road safety procedures, our standards for new bits of highway that are being developed as part of a planning application, our approach to things like street lighting, highway maintenance, pothole repair, anything that you can think of really. So it would be a wide-ranging set of documents, but we're hopeful that we can set that out in such a way that you can navigate to a particular area of interest very quickly, and then get the information that you need. So that's all I'm planning to talk to you about. Obviously, there's an opportunity for questions. The consultation, I'll mention it again, runs until the 18th, so please go ahead and fill that in for us. But from there, I think I'll probably hand over to Margaret and we'll take questions at the end, if that's a suitable format for you.
That's a very suitable format. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Okay, I'll stop sharing my screen and mute myself.
Can people see my screen now?
Yes, we can.
Yep, that's brilliant. Thank you. So I'm Margaret Smith. I'm from Transport Planning at the County Council as well. So all I wanted to do this afternoon was to, I think Gary's given a very good high-level overview of the local transport plan process. Just while we're looking at more of a Leamington focus, I just wanted to highlight to this group what some of those key issues, but also what some of those key opportunities might be, looking at transport in this area for the future. So I think Gary's already summarised this, but I mean, essentially, we need to be able to meet the demand for people to travel, whether that's to work, to school, for shopping, or for leisure. And we need to support these trips in a way which supports the economy, but also protects the environment, keeps people safe, and keeps them healthy. So there are choices, there will be priorities that need to be made. I think Gary set out clearly from this initial stage of the local transport plan development, how through engagement activities like this, through the wider consultation, we're seeking views from the public and from businesses as to what those priorities should be. And then just to flag up that there are choices, there will be priorities that we make, and potentially with that there may be some trade-offs. So just in terms of some of the key issues in this area in particular, so this slide looks at commuters more generally across Warwickshire. It's not specific to the Leamington area, but the trends we see here, we also see in Leamington. And I've purposely got a slide that goes back a number of decades, and really it's just to demonstrate how we have become, it's not just in Warwickshire, it's as a country as a whole, very car dependent. Again, this shows trips to work, but this would relate to other types of trips as well. So the grey, can you see my cursor? So the grey bars in the middle, that shows the percentage of trips being undertaken by car, and then all of the other colour bars, they show the other modes, which at the same time as the amount of car dependency has gone up, the other modes have then had a decline, with the exception of rail, which started from a low base and has started to increase slightly. So really the reason for showing this slide is just to set the context really of this car dominated world, and that if we want to do things differently, we need to then look at how some of these other modes could accommodate trips that are currently undertaken by car. And then the other thing to say, so Gary mentioned about place and how important that is, and how different people might access those different places. I think the other thing to stress is that for this area, and again it's not unique to this area, but the places where people want to get to aren't necessarily in a centralised place, they're quite dispersed across the area. And again, this brings in challenges in terms of how they are served by different transport modes. So, if you were a big city area and you can get a really good bus or rail facility into your centre, that's fine. You can probably meet a lot of the demands for travel. In this area, it just makes it slightly more difficult. And then another thing to flag up was just in terms of how other things can influence how people travel. So for example, with our workplaces, there is a lot of free parking at destinations of some of the major employers. And again, this is a factor in how people decide to make their journey. So, the freely available parking place might encourage somebody to travel by car versus another mode. And then we also see that people can then question kind of the attractiveness and convenience of alternatives compared to the car. So whether that's around safety concerns or a cycle network that isn't complete, it might have kind of missing links. Whether that's, I've said perceived, I think there's the reality of a high cost of bus travel. I think as well, information. So, people, if they jump in their car, a lot of people now just have a sat nav, they can easily get to where they want to get to. It's more difficult if you want to plan a journey by bus or rail or even on a bicycle, it's more difficult to have that information. And this means that sometimes, or quite often, the car is more convenient and sometimes a faster option for people to go with. And just to say as well that this isn't a static situation. So we know that demand for travel will grow within this area. That's partly, as Gary said, about the new developments that we already know are committed as part of the district's local plan. It's not just the impact of the district's developments. We know that neighbouring authorities also have developments that will have impacts on travel into this area. So, for example, some of the developments for Stratford, the main retail centres that they will access are most likely within Warwick district. So that's kind of the downside and some of the issues that we have to deal with, but there are some really significant opportunities. So I just wanted to run through those. From the work that we've done, there is a high proportion of short distance trips within this area. So within the Warwick and Leamington urban area, it's just less than a quarter of journeys to work. So again, it's journeys to work are less than 2 kilometres. So that's just over 1.25 miles. When you look at journeys less than 5 kilometres, so 3 miles, that's just less than half of the journeys. And it's not just in the urban area that we see this dominance of short trips. We see that across the wider Warwick district as well. So what that means is there is a huge potential to switch to, as Gary mentioned, these active travel modes, so walking and cycling for these short trips. But we need to make sure that the infrastructure is there to be able to support those trips for people to feel safe to travel by those modes. And this slide is just really to illustrate what does 5 kilometres mean when you transpose that onto the Warwick and Leamington area. So essentially from the town centres of Leamington or Warwick, 5 kilometres gets you right to the edge of Kenilworth. It covers the villages, you know, beyond Whitnash down to the south. We've got Leek Wootton, so there's quite a big chunk of the area that is within that relatively short distance. And the other thing to say, so I saw in the chat that somebody had mentioned, do we work with neighbouring authorities? So one of the key things we do is transport isn't constrained by local authority boundaries. We are very aware of the significance of trips into and out of the district, but some of those are on key routes. So what that does mean is that we can focus some of our efforts in terms of bus travel or rail corridors to serve those key destinations. And by focusing on those key corridors, whether that's key corridors within a town or some of those movements between towns, we can then maximise the impacts of our infrastructure. And then the other thing I just wanted to come on to was just to illustrate some examples of, so I think up till this point I've probably been talking more about the infrastructure side of things and what we can do to get the transport facilities right for people to be able to use. But I think I just wanted to illustrate some of the other initiatives. So sometimes we call them kind of the softer side of initiatives that are there at the moment and actually can have a significant impact. So we have a car sharing platform across Coventry and Warwickshire that's been in place for a number of years. It's one of the largest in the country. It's free for the public to use. They can log on, they can look and find if there is a journey. Obviously in a COVID world, it's a bit problematic at the moment, but certainly as we come out of COVID, as we have the vaccination programme rolled out, it's something that really can make a difference. You know, if everybody kind of signed up to do this, even one day a week, that's 20% less cars on the network. And again, this slide was just to show, again, pre-COVID, the picture would probably look a bit different at the moment with people working from home, but just to demonstrate how many journeys are out there. Yeah. So, you know, anybody could log on and try and find a match to be able to share their journey with. And again, just to show how working with LiftShare, so LiftShare are our partner with this car sharing platform. There are a number of examples with local companies. The example here is with Wolsey through their relocation within the Warwick area, or from Leamington into Warwick. They worked with LiftShare, and through that commitment from Wolsey, they saw a huge uptake in car sharing, and that comes with associated savings in terms of either money for the employees, but also, as Gary mentioned, we've got carbon emissions that we're trying to reduce. It actively helps to go towards that. And I just wanted to flag up this as a way so that the people we've worked with on this LiftShare, they're now starting to look at how you might rate different companies in terms of their commuter emission levels. So we're all familiar with this kind of rating when you buy your new fridge. You could start to kind of adopt this for different companies. So, you know, potentially in the future, you might have to show how many emissions, what kind of level you are with those emissions. And then the other thing to flag up, which is quite new within Leamington, I'm not sure how many people know about it. So it's an independent initiative set up by Co-Wheels, who are a car sharing company. Again, I guess with COVID, I can see there's a nervousness in sharing transport at the moment, but as we come out of that, I think hopefully it will gain some momentum. So there's Co-Wheels and also Enterprise locally in the area. These are commercial operations. They're not funded by the local authorities, but they are out there and just help. It's just another thing for those people who might be thinking of getting rid of a second car, or potentially people not even having their main car, that they may cycle or walk for some trips but then have access to a car club. So it's just to flag that up as well. And I think if COVID's done anything, I think it's kind of assessing the demand for travel. So we've always talked about, I've worked in transport planning for 20 years now. We've always talked about home working as one of the tools in our toolbox. We've always talked about virtual meetings and conference calls and things. It's only ever happened now because of COVID, but hopefully we take the lessons we've learned from this into the future, and hopefully we do then try and reduce the need for travel, at least for some of the purposes that we used to do previously. And then it's never a popular topic, but just to flag up as well that there are other ways that we can nudge people towards some of these alternatives rather than the car. So restrictions on parking charges. Obviously, we've got to be sensitive to the economy at the moment, and the town centre economy in particular coming out of COVID. But it was just to flag up that there are other ways, as well as providing the opportunities that are alternatives to the car. There's other ways to encourage people towards those alternatives. And then my last slide was really just, Gary's mentioned about new technology that's coming on stream. I think electric cars, we're hearing about it more and more in terms of the media, almost on a daily basis at the moment. So I think most people are probably aware that the government have set a target to ban the sales of new diesel and petrol cars. That's been brought forward to 2030. We've actively done a piece of work to look at what does that mean in terms of charging infrastructure to help to support that rollout of electric vehicles. But just to flag up that with the work that we've done, by 2030, so by the time of that ban, we anticipate that about 40% of the vehicle fleet will be electric. So that goes some way to helping with that carbon footprint, with carbon emissions. But we've still got a significant amount of the fleet that would still be either petrol or diesel. And just to flag up as well, looking at those headline themes that Gary was talking about, that doesn't address congestion. There's still cars that potentially are stuck in a traffic queue, and it doesn't encourage people to be healthy and active. But again, I think it's a key component of what we would want to do going forward. So just to briefly summarise, there will be trade-offs. There will be some difficult choices. There's only a limited amount of space for transport. I think, what I was trying to illustrate with that first slide is that we really do need a step change. We're starting from a base of a dominance of the car for some of these journeys, and we do need a joined up response. And my last point was really to say that, we're here as the county council. We have a role as a local highway authority, but just to say that there's also a role for residents in the choices, the travel choices that they make every day, and also for the kind of the private sector, for businesses in how they might set up or how they might encourage their staff to travel. So that was everything from me. I'm not sure how to stop sharing my screen.
At the very top,
open.
It should say stop share. Do you find that?
Okay. Oh yeah, sorry, it's because I've got a second screen. Sorry, it's right at the top there.
That's lovely. Thank you very, very much indeed for that, Gary, and for Margaret. Carol, over to you.
Hello, and thank you for a really illuminating chat. That was fascinating, and it's generated a lot of very interesting questions. So without further ado, I'll go to the first one. Colin Quinney would like to ask, how will you try to influence co-location of housing with places work?
Sorry,
So,
that should read places of work. Sorry.
So how will you try to influence co-location of houses with places of work?
So I did mention that the local transport plan is if you like, the mechanism through which the county council as the highway authority can engage in the planning process. So as development comes forward to develop sites, be it for residential purposes or for economic business purposes, then the planning authority, which in your case is Warwick District Council, will come to the county council as the highway authority to ask us what the impact of this proposed development is going to be in terms of transport infrastructure. Now, clearly, if residential developments and economic developments are remote from each other, then that has an increased impact on the highway network, and we would seek to put that back to a developer and say, well, if your development is going to have this impact on travel because people cannot work and live and shop in the same place, they have to travel because of what you're proposing. Obviously, more or less a worst case scenario, but we would put back to them that that therefore has these impacts on transport infrastructure, and they would be liable to mean that to ensure that part of their development is to bring transport infrastructure to the requisite standard. So that's the mechanism by which we would take part in that conversation. And obviously the desire is that actually that makes it incumbent on all of the parties involved, so the highway authority, the planning authority, and the person who's proposing the development or developments, to make sure that these things tie in as closely as they can. And your planning authority has something called a local plan that sets out development in a given area over a long time. I think we're talking like a 50-year period that a local plan sort of looks to influence. So through those processes, we seek amongst all of the partners in that sort of conversation to try and make sure that these new developments are as sustainable as they can possibly be.
Thank you, Gary. Next question is from Rosemary Good. How is park and ride or alternative traffic reduction schemes to be incorporated in the plan?
Shall I pick up on that one, Gary?
Yeah.
So hopefully most people are aware that as part of development to the south of Leamington and Warwick, there is a park and ride, a 500 space park and ride facility that will come on stream as part of that. That includes frequent bus links into both Leamington and into Warwick. So hopefully within the next kind of 3 to 4 years, that should come to fruition. It is dependent on that development coming forward at an appropriate rate. So that's one of the things we're looking at, and we're keen that doesn't just focus on the bus connection. We're keen to look at how we can also have the onward connections by bicycle as well along those 2 corridors. And then we've also done a piece of work with the District Council looking at are there other potential sites within the area that could equally work as park and ride sites. We're calling them mobility hubs rather than park and ride, and that's for that very reason, that it's not just about onward connection by bus, it's connection by other modes as well. And they have a benefit in 2 ways. They help intercept those trips from out of the area and direct them onto either public transport or by bike or walking for the onward journey to their destination. But also they can help in the opposite direction, so depending on their location. So for example, the one to the south of Leamington and Warwick, for people who are working at Jaguar Land Rover down at Gaydon, potentially JLR could use that site, and buses could pick up some of their employees at that site and go in an outbound direction. So they work in 2 ways. So we are actively looking at that.
Thank you. The next question by Colin Quinney is, does the dispersal of destinations require adjustment to bus routes to ensure frequent and regular services to key points, e.g. hospital, leisure centres, and perhaps more circular than hub and spoke routes?
So I think you probably find from the existing routes that they do that they are, and the problem we have is that they become a bit convoluted. So I'm thinking of kind of the Leamington through to Warwick calls at the hospital, so there are examples of where the bus routes become a bit more convoluted to try and capture some of these different destinations. But I fully accept the point that you're making. Yeah, I mean the other thing, and I did see it in the chat stream as well. So the other thing, we are currently working with the Department for Transport. We've submitted a business case for a demand responsive bus service that would be located to the west of Warwick. So I don't know if there's been any press around that locally in the Courier. And essentially that is, so we've got lots of examples in the county of demand responsive bus services. They typically are your ring and ride facility. So you have to pre-book usually 24 hours in advance. If we're successful with the bid for the scheme to the west of Warwick, that would have, it would still have the call centre, but it would also have an app-based booking system. So for those who are familiar with the rideshare schemes like Uber, it would be similar to that. So it doesn't come and pick you up from your house, it would come and pick you up from a street near you. So we're keen to try out that kind of model just to see how that might work on the kind of edge of the urban area with trips into that urban area. So that's one to watch.
That sounds very exciting. A part of that question was, can you use parking revenues to subsidise bus fares?
I believe that you can. There are certainly restrictions on what parking revenues can be used for, and they are used for other highway matters. So they're recycled back into our sort of highway management system, and obviously the management of buses is part of that whole area of operation for the county council. So in principle, I believe so. Yeah.
Thank you. Hopefully that's also answered Susan Rasmussen's question, which was also about the on-demand bus service bid. Please do post if not. So over to Robert Goundry. What about trams with priority over other road users, say Leamington and Warwick?
If I pick up on that one, so traditionally the kind of trams that you're starting to see in the big cities are incredibly expensive. And I can't, off the top of my head, I can't remember the figures, but it'd be something in the order of, I don't know, £20 million per kilometre. So it's prohibitively expensive. And the advantage they have in a big city over an area like Warwick and Leamington is that it can stack up, the high cost of that stacks up because of the high demand for people all wanting to go to the same place. So I think it would be cost prohibitive to introduce that in an area of the size of Warwick and Leamington. What we are actively looking at with Coventry City Council, so they are, I don't know if people have heard of a scheme that they're promoting, which is called Very Light Rail, and it does exactly as it says. It's a lighter version of light rail. By being a lighter version, that means that you don't have to, a big cost associated with any light rail or tram system is that you have to move the utilities that are in the road where that tram's going to run. With the light rail system, they're looking to have a modular system where they don't need to move those utilities, and it brings the cost right down. So we are watching and looking with interest and working with them. I think if it does anything initially, it would be looking at extensions into the outer edges of Coventry, just over the border into Warwickshire. That would be our first look at very light rail, but it's certainly something to consider for the future, I think.
Fantastic. Sally has made a comment. She says, I haven't seen anything about construction traffic management and the number of HGVs using Leamington in its presentation so far. How does this get measured and managed in the plan as it really contributes to pollution and noise?
Shall I pick up on that, Gary? So,
sure.
So my understanding of that is that that would be picked up through the planning consents. So the planning, is that correct, Gary? So the planning consents would specify whether there are restrictions on routes that construction traffic to those sites can take.
Wonderful. Tim has made the comment, he said it's an interesting point on car clubs and new tech. Is there any assumption on emerging transport technologies such as autonomous self-driving cars or car as a service models, which could dramatically reduce car ownership, increase utilization, i.e. a driverless car arrives, takes you to your destination and goes away. You just have a car when you need it. Most cars spend 90% of their time parked.
Yeah, so again, this is a good example of where we work with neighbouring authorities. So Transport for the West Midlands, so they cover the metropolitan area of Birmingham and other authorities. They are actively working on autonomous vehicles. There are some trials at the moment. Some of those trials do come onto Warwickshire roads. So I think it's very much watch this space. And I think, yeah, it can certainly have a role. I mean, I think one of the big advantages of moving to more of a shared transport rather than people owning their cars is exactly for the point that's been raised there, that the majority of cars sit for a lot of the day and they're not actually moving. Many of those are on our streets. So if you can reduce the volume of cars parked outside houses where they don't have off-street provision, you obviously then free up some of that highway space to do other things with, for cycle lanes, bus lanes, that kind of thing. So I guess the thing I would stress is I think at the moment it's probably more of a city solution, but there's no reason why the principles of that couldn't apply to towns like Leamington and Warwick.
Gosh, exciting times ahead with all this. Ian Litton would like to ask, will there be measurable targets in the new LTP for e.g. physical activities, model shift, car use reduction, emission reductions and health improvements?
There certainly will be measurable targets in the local transport plan. We're obviously very early in the process, so we don't yet know what those targets are going to be. That said, the things in the question are obviously the sort of thing that's going to be under consideration as we move into drafting it into more detail.
Cool. Carolyn Pickering would like to ask, could there be any provision to prevent car congestion in the area of primary schools?
Yes, this is Great Heath Road where I live, and I'm not talking about for myself, but for the children. There are large Range Rovers which come and double park in the road, causing pollution and also causing perilous conditions for children, little children who are crossing. It seems to me that parents are not taking responsibility for reducing pollution and making things safer. And my final request is, please don't build any more roads.
Thank you for that. Margaret or Gary, who'd like to reply to that?
Gary, so I thought there was a piece of work that's recently been put into motion looking at precisely that point. So looking at zones around schools. I think it was approved in the latest budget round, wasn't it? So
yes, I think it's gone into the newest council budget, and it is looking specifically at schools. It's from a safety perspective, really, but the scope of the project, I think, is likely to pick up all of the concerns raised. So safety wouldn't be limited simply to the risk of a collision, but things like pollution and congestion and the negative health impacts that we're all aware of. So yes, definitely one of the emerging priorities at the county council.
Thank you very much.
A very topical question, which we will be discussing further as the Leamington Society, is by Ignati Diakov Richmond. Is the issue of Leamington Town Centre permanent pedestrianisation is being actively discussed now in the media. What are your views on this? Is it possible with careful planning, of course?
Will I pick up on that one? So anything's possible. It's a really difficult one because clearly the current arrangements have been brought in because of COVID and specifically to allow for social distancing, and I think it's been incredibly successful in terms of, you know, people feeling they can come shop in the town, not feel constrained to, you know, pavements, albeit they're quite wide. the benefits that we've seen from that scheme. So there's monitoring that's ongoing. I can't remember what the figures are in terms of cycling, but there has been a huge increase in the number of cyclists also using the parade. I think it's agreed that how it's been brought about because of COVID and the need to bring that in very quickly, we haven't gone through the widespread engagement that you would go through if you were to find a permanent solution. So I guess where we're at the moment, there's two things. We need to decide for how long it needs to continue because of the social distancing, and to support the town centre as we come out of the pandemic. I think the next steps are there to really look at that engagement side of things, and is there wider support to keep that in a longer term. And if there is, I think it's then about saying, you know, I think there are some issues people have flagged up about mobility issues particularly for bus users. So, you know, are there different arrangements that could be put in place to ensure that we meet the needs of all users? But from a personal perspective, I like it. I live in Leamington. I always take the opportunity to walk right down the middle of it when I can at the moment. But I accept there are probably mixed views about it as well.
Yes, I think that's going to be a big one to discuss at a later point. Thank you. The questions are still coming in, so you may have to actually give your email addresses. So thank you. I know you're taking a lot here, and there are more. Andrew would like to, as commented, said one of your key themes mentioned is safety. There are a number of roads around Leamington where, in his view, the car speeds are too high, affecting safety and emissions. You haven't mentioned traffic calming measures. Is it planned to extend these?
I'm not aware of any specific plans at the moment to install any further traffic calming in Leamington. That said, it is something that can be considered in the right circumstance. So the local transport plan contains and will almost certainly still contain in its next iteration our policies and procedures when it comes to considering road safety. They are currently centered around casualty reduction. So at the moment, the way that we measure how unsafe a road is would be based around how many collisions are taking place there. We are entering into the process of seeking to renew our road safety strategy. So it's possible that could be refined. I suspect collisions will still form a core part of how we seek to address road safety in the county. But potentially other things like speeds and perception of speeds and road layouts could form part of that strategy. So as with a lot of the things about the LTP itself, it's because we're at this early stage, these things are still sort of being discussed and coalescing. But certainly it will be addressed in the LTP, and as we move further through the process, there'll be further opportunity to comment on exactly what's said in those documents.
Thank you. Mark Sullivan has made the comment saying restoration of local train service, Coventry, Kenilworth, Leamington, attracted good usage until COVID restrictions. So it might need, it improved its usage, right, but it has restrictions up until 11:30 p.m. at night. But a Leamington Warwick Stratford service is very slow, poor and weak, and no one uses it. Can you explain, and can the LTP extend new Coventry Leamington service to Stratford and support the current SWO line reopening study the government has funded? That could lead to the extension from Stratford to Longmarston, Evesham and Worcester, and create new rail corridors serving Leamington and Warwick.
Oh, God.
Sorry, that was a long question.
No, that's fine. I can pick that up. So in terms of rail, so sorry, I think you've got your microphone on, somebody there. Anyway, so in terms of the rail network, so we call it the Knuckle line. That's Nuneaton through to Coventry to Kenilworth, Leamington. There have been huge improvements across that line. That's in recognition of the high demand for travel along that corridor. That's one of the busiest kind of travel demand corridors between Coventry and Warwickshire. So we've been successful in getting that through service from Leamington all the way up to Nuneaton, which was which was very successful pre-COVID. I think most people will be aware that at the moment that service has been suspended. We have regular conversations with West Midlands Trains about that reinstatement, and we're pushing for that as hard as we can. There are some particular issues around the availability of the train crew at the moment and how hard they've been hit by either having COVID or having to self-isolate. So obviously it's unfortunate. It would be an aspiration of ours, so just as it's taken a while to get that through route established, we do see the benefits of improving the links between Leamington and Stratford. So continuing on that line, there are some difficulties in terms of the train paths. So essentially, you know, there's limited kind of rail capacity along that section, so it would require quite a lot of infrastructure to be able to improve that. Beyond that, and looking at the Stratford to Honeybourne and then the connections down to the North Cotswold line, we're aware of that piece of work. Warwickshire are on the steering group for that study, and we have part funded the work that's happening. So again, that's kind of work that's ongoing that we will look at. Again, it's likely to be an expensive bit of infrastructure that will be required to allow that, and there's issues as to how that connection can get from kind of the current Stratford Greenway into the town station. But yes, we're very much interested in that and seeing how that might progress in the future.
Thank you. I am aware there's about another 10 or 15 questions, and there were ones before this. I'm just trying to ask questions and give everybody the opportunity to have one question each answered. And if we have time, then I'll go back and answer more. But I don't know if we have a deadline for this. Usually we finish in about a minute. So you're going to have to talk rather quickly, or we can extend it by another few minutes if wanted. Or we do have a third one. We do record the chat. So if you're open to it, people may, if you wish to, reply to them individually to their questions. But let me ask another one in our short amount of time left. Clive Engel would like to ask, through the A452 as close as Clarendon Square, hundreds of heavy vehicles used through between the M40 and M6, M1, etc., rather than a bypass route. How can WCC stop this dangerous and polluting activity?
So the method by which we would control any sort of transportation use is through traffic regulation orders, and you can do that in principle to control the movement of HGVs in certain circumstances. But of course, that has to take into account the purpose of the HGV movements themselves. So if there is no alternative and a road is of a certain class, such as an A road, then there is an expectation that it would carry a certain amount of HGVs. So, for example, a traffic regulation order banning vehicles over a certain weight is unlikely to be suitable. So then you move into our plans for the wider transport network, whether it be providing alternatives to the highway or providing alternatives on the highway for the use of that sort of vehicle movement. So I'm not sure, I don't know if Margaret perhaps knows more than me, I'm not sure if there is anything on the radar in terms of those specifics, but the LTP will have a HGV strategy almost certainly, and it will set out how we seek to address those sorts of concerns. But those are the powers that we would use if we came to the conclusion that we were going to look to intervene. I would also say, of course, sorry, if I can jump in quickly, that I've mentioned the consultation that's live lots of times. There are all sorts of free text boxes in that consultation, so some of these questions potentially could be asked through that medium as well, if people are interested in filling that in.
I think that sounds a great idea, because there are some really good questions in here. I'm just not sure we'll have quite enough time to go through them all.
I would like to finish fairly quickly.
Yes, the people have things to go on to. Can I ask a final question then from Barry Franklin, if that's okay, which is, as part of the plan, can you take into account the polluting buses and help persuade the local bus company to use electric buses?
So again, I can come in on this one. So It's quite good timing. We are actively working with Coventry City Council on a scheme. So I don't know if people have heard the announcement that Coventry have been successful in getting to the final stages of an all electric bus town bid. So this is a DFT bid that you were able to bid into. There were 19 bids. Coventry and Oxford are the two that have made it to the final round. A full business case has now been submitted and it's been considered. If that's successful, Warwickshire will benefit by having the cross-boundary services being converted to electric. So that's a government grant that comes in that helps convert those existing diesel buses to new electric buses. The bus operators have to be on board with that. So we've been working hard with Stagecoach and National Express. But as it stands at the moment, they are supportive of that approach. So hopefully within the next month or so, we should have some news on the outcome of that. Just to manage expectations, nothing will happen that quickly. So it's the programme is due to have all the buses in place by 2024-25. In terms of encouraging operators to do this off their own back, it's a bit like saying, you know, the public suddenly have to all buy an electric car. There is a cost associated with that, and at the moment it's more expensive for the operators to buy electric buses than it is to stick with their diesel buses. I guess the other thing to stress as well is that the most up-to-date so Euro 6 standard for diesel buses is actually not too bad in terms of some of the pollution parameters. So you know, it's easier to think of the old diesel buses, but certainly as the fleets are renewed, we will see air quality benefits. But certainly if that bid's successful and it's looking promising at the moment, then yeah, Warwickshire and Leamington will be part of that.
Thank you very much. There are actually 30 questions in total. You've answered approximately 18, so really well done. And actually, they're really interesting questions. This is a very lively conversation. Thank you, everybody, for putting your effort into posing these. And I'm sorry we haven't got longer to answer them all, but please can you remind us of how people can directly communicate and input into this consultation?
Yes, so would the best thing be for me to post a link in the chat that can be picked up?
That would be great. And also the Leamington Society will be actually reminding people and sharing this on the website, I'm sure, or on the social media page that we have as well. At this point, while you put it into the chat, I'll hand back to Sydney.
Thank you very much indeed. Yes, just to say, the chat will be saved and I will forward the questions to you, Gary and Margaret, so that even the unanswered ones you will be able to see. A recording of this will be placed on the Leamington YouTube site, which you can access via the Leamington Society website. And on the last slide there, I will put the link to the consultation as well, so you will be reminded of it there. It just remains for me to say a very, very big thank you to both Gary and Margaret for giving up time this afternoon to come along to answer questions and to tell us about the refreshing of the local transport plan, particularly with reference to Leamington. And also thank you to everybody who's come, who's listened and then contributed by asking questions as well. It has been great. So thank you very much to everybody. A virtual clap to Margaret and to Gary. And we hope to see everybody at another meeting soon, March the 18th.
Sorry, and a final note. Sorry, I was just going to jump in there to say, don't forget, we have got talks happening. We've got some future ones. Our next one is Abby Plum, who's going to be talking about the joys of being a developer in gaming. We have actually Stephanie Kerr, who's the director of Bid Leamington, who will be talking about the future of Leamington. We also have Catherine Geddes, who's going to introduce us to the local neighbourhood plan. So there are a whole array of talks taking place. We've been doing them for a year. We hope to, we will continue them for a bit longer. But this is a moment also to thank all the people who are taking part, you who actually are visiting them regularly, which is fantastic. And if you're not a member of the Leamington Society, please do go to leamingtonsociety.org and join probably one of the most influential and very exciting groups that are doing these, hosting these talks at the moment. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye all.
Bye.
Very good.